back of the rim. Garnett on the slam. Here's a Curry way downtown. Oh, what a shot from Curry!
Unless you're a Warriors fan, you're pretty unlucky right now, but I don't need to rehash the state of the NBA to you because you know where it's at. Golden State were the champions in 2015, should have been the champions last year, they're the champions this year, and could easily run off another 2 or 3 titles if everything goes according to plan. But I'm not here to just discuss the dominance of the Warriors today, rather I'm here to talk about how damn lucky they had to be to even get where they're at. I feel like in the last 3 seasons, we've been preoccupied with keeping up with their hot shooting and dominant team ball, but I never hear anybody talk about how unlikely this roster was to exist in the first place, and that's what I'm going to describe today. What's up NBA fans, Dom2K on the mic, and if you followed the NBA closely before 2015, you're lucky because you can remember how the Warriors just seemingly popped up out of nowhere. It's like one day we were talking about when the Clippers were finally going to put it all together and make the finals, how many more years the Spurs were going to be contending for, how many more championships the Big Three in Miami could bring, and then boom, Steph Curry and the squad seemingly all of a sudden became elite. And all in the span of 3 seasons, they totally changed how we thought about the 3-point shot, broke the Chicago Bulls 72-win record, and then to many of your delights added Kevin Durant. But before the Warriors were ever a dominant team, how likely was all of this to ever happen? Well, not likely. Like the Orlando Magic winning a championship in the next decade, not likely. First, we look back to the 12-season span between 1994 and 2006, otherwise known as the decade plus that the Warriors resembled the Clippers. I only bring up this era because for most of it, the Warriors were just one of those teams you expected absolutely nothing from. For that amount of time, they made a grand total of 0 playoff appearances, won no more than 38 games, and their average win percentage was 35.1%. That's pretty incredible, right? Those guys were on fire, literally. That all looked like it was changing in 2007 when one of their most famous squads pulled off one of the biggest upsets in NBA history, eliminating Dirk Nowitzki's 67-win Mavericks as an A seed in the first round. That's pretty unforgettable, but in the scheme of things it didn't matter much because being that they were in the Western Conference, improving to 48 wins wouldn't be enough to get them into the playoffs in just the very next season. And coming into the 2009 season, their short mini run of improvement would come to a sudden end as Baron Davis would sign with the Clippers and Al Harrington would be sent to New York, resulting in a 29-win season, which was more of the same, and it seemed like Golden State was just doomed to be bad for eternity, pretty much like the Clippers around that time. However, we now know that those 2 moves that seemed detrimental at the time were some of the most fortunate events in NBA history for a single team. Had Baron Davis had somehow stayed a Warrior, along with them deciding to keep Harrington, they would have retained 2 of the top scorers and would have never been bad enough to take Stephen Curry with the 7th pick in the 2009 draft, who little did they know at the time would become one of the greatest point guards ever. But their luck didn't stop there. Both Sacramento and Minnesota passed up on them when they really could have used them, and it almost seemed like they were right to do so. Tariq Evans became Rookie of the Year, and Ricky Rubio looked promising as well as the years passed. Meanwhile, Curry had plenty of injury scares with his fragile ankles, had surgery for the problem in the summer of 2011, injured that ankle again, allowing him to play only 26 games in a lockout-shortened season, and all of this prevented him from becoming an All-Star until the 2014 season. This made him a late bloomer, but that's almost the key to this entire thing because Curry's delayed emergence allowed for 2 things. 1, the Warriors again placed decently enough in the draft that they were able to take his partner in crime Klay Thompson in 2011. This is another scenario that was just dumb luck because there's about 7 teams in front of the Warriors that probably wish they had taken him first. And the second thing this did was allow the Warriors to extend Stephen Curry's contract at a bargain. The now unanimous MVP and 2-time MVP was signed to a 4-year extension in 2012 that actually didn't kick in until the 13-14 season, where he'd make around $11 million annually. When you consider all the dominance you've seen from him over the last few seasons was done on that contract, that took a huge stroke of luck that really looked more like misfortune back then. Oh, and it also allowed them the flexibility that they've had with this roster over the years. That flexibility allowed them to pay Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, and Kevin Durant, which it's fair to say wouldn't have happened if he had blossomed earlier like most of his 2009 classmates. Speaking of Draymond Green, the 2012 draft basically completed the core of the first Warriors roster. Not only were they able to pick up Harrison Barnes at number 7, but Draymond Green wasn't selected until the 2nd round at the 35th spot. Green has since become a Defensive Player of the Year and the emotional leader of the Warriors, so that's the definition of a steal, and he wound up being the perfect player for this budding Warriors system back in this time. A power forward with the perfect body type and skill set to defend 4 or 5 positions, handle the ball, shoot the 3, and make passes to all the shooters that would eventually be around him. You couldn't get any luckier than that. But right before this draft that completed the Warriors' core, there was a move that absolutely nobody could make sense of at the time that ended up being another wildly fruitful choice for Golden State. You may remember Monte Ellis, who was a solid 20 to 25 points per game scorer around this time, sharing the backcourt with Stephen Curry. Yeah, they traded him to the Bucks for Andrew Bogut. Now, I have to remind you here that Bogut was an intense risk at this time. He was drafted in 2005 and had only played over 69 games, twice his entire career to that point. Just when he looked like he was about to break through and become a great big man, he mutilated his elbow in one of the worst injuries in sports history. That was in 2010, and in 2012 when the Warriors traded for him, he wasn't even playing. He fractured his ankle just 12 games into the lockout season and wouldn't return to play for Golden State that year, so Warriors fans were pissed and the rest of us were puzzled. When the owners for the Warriors were still new, they took to center court very shortly after that trade and were showered by boos from the entire arena. You can kinda see where trading a top scorer for an injury-prone big man before Klay Thompson and Draymond Green era might have pissed some people off. And it didn't feel any better when Bogut only appeared in 32 games for the 2013 season after rushing back from the ankle injury. So let's just pause and collect ourselves to review where we are right now, because I have jumped around quite a bit. The Warriors assigned Stephen Curry to a bargain because he hasn't fully emerged yet. They very dangerously traded one of their best scorers for an injury-prone big man that stayed injury-prone. They were lucky enough to be able to pick up Klay Thompson and Draymond Green because so many teams passed on them, and they also picked up Harrison Barnes. But here's the catch: around 2013, not one of these players have emerged to elite status yet, so nobody even knows what's about to happen. But maybe they should have. If you were paying attention in 2013, the Warriors showed flashes of what they could be in the playoffs. Personally, the first time I paid full attention to Steph Curry was when he lit New York up for 54 points late in February. I'll never forget trying to fall asleep for school, but not being able to because this small kid whose ankles were made out of clay was absolutely shutting it down from deep. I'll also never forget turning to the Warriors and Spurs playoff series that same year, where San Antonio came within just one win of the championship. The Warriors were actually giving them a challenge, and again, this felt out of nowhere because the Warriors hadn't truly arrived yet. But there was something about Stephen Curry picking the ball up from the floor, going straight into a shooting motion that told me he just might be special. But there's something else you need to remember. This young, off-the-radar Warriors team actually almost won both home games against the Spurs. You may have forgotten about that game winner Ginobili hit when they were down by 1 with only 3 seconds left in the game. I'll remind you that the Warriors won games 2 and 4, meaning they could have stolen both Spurs home games and went up 3-1. That series to me was the ultimate testament to what was about to happen, and this came after they had upset the Nuggets in the first round, so I started to see them on the map from that year on. But with Miami having such a vice grip on the NBA at the time, it just seemed weird to imagine that any young team could pop up out of nowhere to steal their shine anytime soon. That summer, they made their final ultra important addition to this specific group in Andre Iguodala. But when they lost to the Clippers in the first round the very next year, many people saw the Warriors as a good young team, but absolutely nobody pegged them as a 67-win team for the 2015 season, especially after they fired Mark Jackson in favor of Steve Kerr. Now, there's two kinds of people out there: the people who believe Kerr unlocked the potential of this roster with the adjustments to their rotation, and the people who now believe the Warriors would have broken out with or without Steve Kerr. So I'll let you decide how to feel about that, but I think he made some necessary adjustments, so it's impossible for me not to say that this was yet another dangerous but amazing move by Warriors management. So we know what happens in 2015. The Warriors start off with an out-of-nowhere 23-3 record. Steph Curry officially arrives on the scene as a top point guard and player in the league, and the Warriors go on to win the championship. But there's something important that needs to be discussed here. If you've read Bill Simmons' book of basketball, he talks about categories that championship teams fall into and how it affects their performances during their best years. He makes 3 categories for the teams, but honestly, the 16 Warriors fall between 2 categories. They're the defending champions that wanted to show every team they had no chance against them almost every night, but they also fall into the category of a championship team trying to avenge a disappointing playoff exit. Although the Warriors didn't actually lose in the 2015 finals, almost nobody gave them credit for beating Cleveland in 6 without Kyrie or Love. Many people just use the logic that if it took you 6 to beat LeBron James and a group of role players, you would have never beaten them with 2 other stars, and so this was a bit of a blessing because it drove the Warriors into a mode that typically only comes from the type of disappointment they experienced in the 2016 finals. To clarify what I mean, take the 1996 Bulls for example, which record-wise was the greatest Bulls team. Well, it just so happens that they became the best team ever after suffering their only playoff exit after 1990 with Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen on the team. So it almost feels like you can say the Warriors' historical 73-win season was a result of all the criticism they received from narrowly winning a finals they probably should have swept. And this leads straight into the most important factor for where we are now, but I have to switch teams for just a second first. We've already went through the Warriors timeline up to the start of the 2016 playoffs, but you can't underrate the part the Thunder's misfortune played in this. Remember, aside from San Antonio, the Thunder were seen as the best Western team before the Warriors magically appeared, but they just had so much bad luck after the 2012 finals. Letting go of James Harden due to money constraints was the first problem. Would Harden have ever reached his MVP level sharing shots with Westbrook and KD? Probably not, but it would have at least given them the third guy they needed to help Westbrook and Durant and get them over the hump, and I think they would have won at very least one championship somewhere down the line, and KD probably would still be there today. On top of that, injuries totally screwed up everything they had going. In 2013, Westbrook got hurt in the first round and shut OKC out of all title talks. In 2014, they were both healthy, but Ibaka didn't come back until 2 games into the Spurs series when they were already down 0-2, and that might have been a very winnable series with him healthy the whole time. And in 2015, KD was struggling with foot issues, which kept the Thunder from even making the playoffs. This left just one more chance for them to reach the finals before Kevin Durant's free agency decision. But we already know about that anticlimactic choke job in the conference finals, and there's one more thing we need to discuss. By now, I've lost count of all the things that went the Warriors' way en route to them becoming what they are today. There's been a couple of things that looked terrible at the time but wound up being blessings, and here are a few more. Right as the 2016 playoffs started, so did the Warriors' apparent misfortunes, and Curry would be almost immediately hindered by injuries. Let me tell you what I remember. For 19 minutes, Stephen Curry looked like the absolute unanimous MVP that he was the entire season, and he was shooting the Rockets out of the building. In 19 minutes of Game 1, Curry scored 24 points, had 7 rebounds, hit 5 3-pointers, and was a plus 28 in the plus and minus category. And then a magical ankle sprain appeared out of thin air, and you can dispute this if you want, but the game never looked as easy as it normally did for Curry after that injury. It didn't help that he damn near blew out his knee in Houston either a couple of games later, but between those 2 injuries, that was pretty much the end of a consistent unanimous MVP Curry in the playoffs. People have often brought up the game he had in Portland, but they fail to remember that that was a game where Curry got really hot towards the end of the game. It's hard to explain, but he just didn't have that it factor that he showed so effortlessly in Game 1 at Houston after all those injuries. Anyways, that's a little beside the point. Although they were able to muster every bit of effort they had to come back from 3-1 against the Thunder, and Klay Thompson played a huge part in that in Game 6 by the way, what happened in the 2016 finals actually turned out being their final blessing leading up to where they are now. With Curry already talking about resting his hurt knee in the middle of that series, probably assuming that it was close to over, Draymond Green got suspended, and they lost their defensive anchor in Andrew Bogut. I'm sorry, but you're never going to be able to convince me that Golden State loses this lead to Cleveland if those 2 things don't happen. If they have both guys in Game 5, they win the championship at home. If they have Bogut for Game 6 or 7, they win. There's just no way I can give Cleveland that series, much in the same way that I agree the Cavs would have won in 2015 with their stars healthy. I feel like they won each other's championships for those 2 years, and I've been saying that forever. But all that's irrelevant now. What matters is the Warriors lost, Bogut got hurt, Harrison Barnes played like trash, and these ingredients created the perfect storm for Kevin Durant's introduction to the Warriors. Durant has already come out and said that he wouldn't have been on the Warriors had they won that championship, so their loss and the fact that Barnes and Bogut became expendable kinda made this move inevitable. And here we are today, where literally everything good or bad from the year 2009 all the way to the summer of 2016 resulted in the Warriors creating the best team ever on paper. Bill Simmons also says in his book that the reason that we don't see teams like the Celtics or the Lakers from the 80s that are just stacked with talent is because of the salary rules of today, the owners being afraid to spend money, and the overexpansion of the league. That book was published in 2009, and back then he declared that there would never be another team stacked like those because of the factors he laid out. Well, as fate would have it, that's pretty much what we have in Golden State today, if not more, but there's something else that needs to be said. A big theme from his book was the secret of basketball that he learned through talking to Isaiah Thomas. To simplify that secret for you, it has less to do with how talented a team actually is at basketball, but more how a team's success depends on a player accepting their role and what they're willing to sacrifice, and whether or not greed and excess eventually breaks up a team. For example, I mentioned the Thunder earlier because their failure to go by this rule was crucial for both them and what's going on with the Warriors today. No shade to James Harden because I'd be breaking that damn rule all day for the hundreds of millions of dollars he has, but when contract negotiations came up, if Harden would have been willing to stay for less money, we'd probably be talking about how many championships those 3 could win for the rest of their careers. Instead, we're talking about that with the Warriors because they've mastered the secret of basketball Isaiah Thomas described in every way possible. This is a team that cares about nothing except winning. Their brand of basketball is totally unselfish on both ends of the floor, and as a result, any flaw you can think of with that roster is covered by the fact that the players with their level of talent care nothing about their personal stats. And off the court, you see this offseason that they're totally unselfish there too. Thompson and Green were already signed, so there was nothing to worry about there, but Curry finally got his due with a $200 million contract, and Kevin Durant took a pay cut just so this roster could stay together and Stephen Curry could get that money. The disease of more is when a team gets broken up by these type of things after winning a championship. Somebody wants more shots, somebody wants more money, somebody wants their own team. It's the reason why you rarely ever see a three-peat anymore. Not only did the Warriors retain absolutely every important piece of their roster this summer, they had the flexibility to get even better by signing 2 more shooters to their bench, all but assuring that they're going to be the champions next year and probably for years to come. So there you have it. In 8 seasons, the Golden State Warriors went from bottom feeders to a very likely NBA dynasty. They're a group of 4 of the best players in the league with a total understanding of the word sacrifice, and if there's no injuries and that continues, that's going to be the single most important factor in them becoming a dynasty. You lived through the Warriors' last 3 years of success, but now you understand how incredibly lucky they had to be with everything that led up to here. If one single factor goes wrong, we may not be looking at this today. What if the Thunder didn't experience so much misfortune? What if the Warriors' new management wasn't edgy enough to ship off a top scorer for a notoriously injured big man? What if the 2008 Warriors were able to keep their core intact and improve on their 48-win season, causing them to miss out on Stephen Curry in the 2009 draft? So many things could have went wrong, so many things looked wrong, but everything went right. And that's why we're here today. I'll never forget when the Warriors' new management took over in 2010, and as they were being introduced to the crowd, they said something very ironic now that we look back at it. Remember that this is when the Warriors were still well-known losers to everyone, so most of us laughed as it was being said, but today I've shown you the incredible luck that led up to it all happening.
If you look up there, that is a very lonely flag. We want another one.